Yeah. Well, I just start a talk, and probably won't go as long as I might have, but the story behind the book, because you said you were interested in the story behind the book, is that I'm a freelance writer, and I've been in Vermont doing this. I'm a former newspaper guy, so I've been doing projects in Vermont for decades, mostly for nonprofits, and a lot of them in higher education. I've done work for UVM and the state college system and a lot of the small colleges. Just projects like might be something that, what we call a view book, where prospective students would read about this college. So I had done some writing back in the 90s for CCV, and I had no idea about CCV. Most of us tend to think of the community college wherever we live as sort of a, just a kind of a lower quality college, but it's nice that it's open to everybody. I grew up in New Jersey, where every county has a college, a community college, and they're campuses. They're commuter colleges. The students don't live there, but it's a campus like a regular college. So that's how I thought of it as a community college. And around the country, that's basically what the community college is. It's a campus that you go to, usually as a commuting student, and it's open to everybody. It's open admissions. So when I did this project, a couple of marketing writing projects for CCV, brochures and things, I interviewed students and alums, and I was really impressed. One of the things I was really impressed by was that the composition of a typical community college of Vermont class is anything from a high school student to somebody who a retiree and everybody in between. So you have a wide range of life experiences and viewpoints in a class. I went to a regular college where we were all 18-year-olds who thought we knew everything, and of course we knew nothing, right? We were kids. So I thought that would be a really interesting experience to go to college where people brought all this life experience and diversity of points of view, economic diversity. There's more racial diversity in CCV classes than you would expect, especially around Burlington, where there are a lot of immigrant populations. See CCV as one of their first points of access to, to employment, qualifying for employment. So I was impressed, and I had a positive sense of the school, but I still didn't know a lot about it. Just that it served adults as well as high school, college-age kids, and that it was open access so anybody could go, and that there were different centers around the state. There wasn't a campus, there were different centers. And in those days, I think there weren't as many centers. The college would do classes in high school, classrooms at night, church basements, all kinds of places. So I had this positive sense. And maybe 5 years ago, I knew a guy, and I used to live in Montpelier, and I knew a man named Tim Donovan who had been president of CCV. He's now retired. And so we had lunch one day. He said, the college is about to turn 50, and we think it's got a really unique story that should be told. Would you be interested if I raised some money privately? It's not a college project. Would you be interested in telling a story? I said, yeah. So the understanding was that I would research and write this book, and the understanding was that the college would help, but they would never tell me what to write. So I could write a real book, not a PR project. And that was fine, that worked out. So I started, and what resulted, this came out last year, was this book called Kind of a Miracle, The Unlikely Story of the Community College of Vermont. So I have a couple of images. I wanted to start with some numbers, just to give an idea. I don't know if you can see this, but in 2015, oh, did I not? Now I pressed the button, and why did it not wake up the screen? Interesting, because it's woken up here. Huh. Now it just rotated, but it didn't come back. Here we go. So how do I wake up the screen here?
Is that remote?
Well, it's on the. I don't want to turn it off. Interesting. I'm hesitant to punch buttons because I know that I'll get all messed up. We might have to ask.
You touch that.
So I touched this.
What about the big screen?
Well, that just made it small again. Can you pause the camera for a minute?
Well, we'll edit.
You'll edit, okay. Yeah, I'm hesitant to touch things. So I think if you don't... what I can do is just ask Maya, if you don't mind, really quickly, I'll run downstairs and say, we can't get the big screen going. I'll be right back. Don't leave. Okay. You can't leave, Deb. Is that Carol? No. Oh, sorry, I thought you were somebody else. Hey, Maya. We can't get the big screen to wake up there.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know what I was hesitant to go touching things on the remote. Nothing good ever comes of that.
Right, yeah.
Where did she go? She can't leave. She's our audience. We have one. And she's very nice. So what gets it going?
I just hit the power button.
See, I was afraid to do that.
Yeah, no, I understand, yeah.
And then will that menu go away if we just leave it alone? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Hey, Deb, come back. You're not allowed to leave. We got it fixed. She's a captive audience because she's our only one. But she's very nice. That's right, she's very nice.
She is, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you can see this, but I'm starting with, higher education's been under pressure for a few years because issues of cost and the fact that in today's economy, it's not only 18 to 21-year-olds who need to learn. People need to learn at different stages through life. So there's more need for adults to go to college. There's more needs for people to find affordable ways to go to college. And when you're an adult, you have other issues: flexibility, time, cost, how long it's going to take to get a degree. There are a lot of issues. So in 2015, Georgia Tech, one of the finer schools in the country, organized a Blue Ribbon Expert Commission on the future of higher education. And they issued a report, which I read about in the Washington Post. And the article about their conclusion said that they came to 3 particular recommendations for what the college of the future in the 21st century should offer or involve. And the first one is that they said college for life rather than just 4 years. The primary recommendation of the Georgia Tech report is that the university form itself into a venue for lifelong learning that allows students to associate rather than enroll. Such a system would provide easy entry and exit points into the university and imagines a future in which students take courses either online or face-to-face, often in shorter spurts over the course of a lifetime. Well, that's different. That's not your typical 4-year college where you go and live there and, as an 18-year-old. Second recommendation is the college of the future should have a network of advisors and coaches for a career. Because if you're an adult student, you usually often will have a family and a job and lots of complications and problems to solve, challenges to work out that a 19-year-old living at Middlebury, for example, or UVM, doesn't have, Obviously they still have advisors in a traditional college, but my advisor, I never went to talk to him, it was, He was there, I guess, if I needed him, and he was a nice guy, but I never really needed anything. I was there and I just went to my classes. But if I was a 40-year-old single mother with 3 kids at home, and I wanted to get my degree at last, I would need support and expertise about how to navigate the issues, how to schedule, how to access financial aid, lots of support that I would need. And if I was looking to qualify for a career or an advancement in my career with a degree, then I would often need help, more help than the typical college kid in planning for that, you know. And so that their second recommendation is the College of the Future should have a network of advisors and coaches for a career. And the third recommendation is that the College of the Future or University of the Future should have what they call a distributed presence around the world. In other words, and here's the recommendation, colleges and universities operate campuses and require students to come to them. In the past couple of decades, online education has grown substantially, but for the most part, higher education is still about face-to-face interaction. Georgia Tech imagines a future in which the two worlds are blended. So if you take these 3 recommendations from 10 years ago, one is college for life rather than the short term, or just 4 years, a network of advisors and coaches to support students, mostly adult students, and a distributed presence. In other words, not just a single campus that you go to, but presence that is closer to you and would offer more options for where you needed to go. If you take those 3 recommendations and you substitute statewide for nationwide, you're describing the Community College of Vermont. That is what CCV is. It is a college set up in a very different way. It doesn't have a campus. It has evolved to a point that it has 12 centers that are CCV locations, and they like to say that CCV is within 25 miles of 90% of the people in Vermont. And that's an unusual thing to be able to say. Originally, the college was created kind of out of thin air. There was no model for what people wanted to do. So what I wanted to do today was briefly tell what I think is the fascinating story of how this unusual college got started. A college without a campus, a college set up for adults more than even traditional students, a college that has a distributed presence around the state, and a college that is flexible in terms of how you would interact with it. It might take you 8 years, it might take you longer, and there are other unique aspects of CCV that I can get to. But the beginning was this gentleman, where's his, here he is. Peter Smith is a guy who, at 24 years old, became president of CCV. He was a Vermonter from a very prominent family in banking. His father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had all been president of the Vermont Savings Bank, or the Burlington Savings Bank. Kind of Vermont aristocracy. His family knew everybody, and he grew up, he went to Princeton, and so he was very much a privileged young man. But he had an interesting point of view. He wanted to be in education, but he tried classroom teaching and he hated it. He said, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different. So he was doing a couple of innovative things. He'd created a sort of a service learning program in Vermont high schools that Vermont high schools students could do service work for credit. And this was a brand new thing. This was the late 60s. And so Peter's this young guy. And there was, at the time, a nationwide movement to build many new community college campuses around the country. And many were built. But in Vermont, there was the governor at the time, Governor Phil Hoff, appointed a commission to study, well, what could Vermont do? Because Vermont didn't have much money, and it was a very rural area. So if you built one campus, say in Randolph Center where the Vermont Tech is, how would people get to it? How would it become accessible as well as affordable? So the commission had suggested that instead of a traditional campus, Vermont create a sort of a community college without a campus, where there would be classes in Here it is. The Commission's January 1969 report noted quote, a mounting interest in and demand for adult education programs among Vermonters eager to acquire new or improved employment skills. So the Commission proposed a different idea, the establishment of what they called the Vermont Regional Community College System. They were kind of vague about what that would mean, but they said it would, both credit and non-credit courses would be offered between 4 p.m. and midnight, you know, maybe with instructors recruited from Vermont businesses to teach what they knew. It was a kind of a radical idea that was thought of as a liberal, you know, fantasy, and it went nowhere. The governor didn't push it, it was tabled, and it went nowhere. But a year or so later, the Commissioner of Education gave a talk at a conference in Stowe about jobs. There was a lot of need for adult education in Vermont. There was a lot of poverty here, and people needed and wanted education, but they couldn't, you know, go to a traditional campus. So this idea suddenly interested people. It had been thought to be politically dead, and there was a new governor. He was a conservative Republican, but his son, his name was Dean Davis. His son was the head of the Vermont Office of Economic Opportunity, which was kind of a late 60s federally funded office to try to provide, you know, economic opportunity, new training, and so forth. And he said to his dad, "Why don't we give this idea a try?" And the governor said, "Okay." So he put out an executive order creating a commission to plan for a different kind of college. And this guy, Peter Smith, he says, I had started a street academy in Montpelier for dropouts called the Montpelier Educational Facility. I remember, but he said, I'm still working with some of these other guys on this idea. I remember sitting in a meeting talking about advertising the college director's job because it's a one-year grant, the clock's ticking, and we don't even have a director. They were talking about the job description, and I was, you know, holding court. If you guys advertise for a community college president, you're going to get a college president, and that's not what this state needs. We need something more like the Ag Extension Service, not an educational institute. So one of the other guys in the room turns around and at one point and said to me, "If you're so damn smart, Peter, why don't you apply for the job?" I said, "Really?" He said, "Peter, we've got 10 and a half months and $59,000 because they had this OEO grant." And Peter said, "There were 3 finalists, of which I was one, and I was probably the strongest candidate of the 3, which tells you something about the quality of the pool. Basically, nobody thought it would work, so I got it." But Peter had this idea based on this proposal. He said, "I started to do some research and very quickly found out that there was no model for what we had said we wanted to do. There were no campus colleges in the country. There were no operating models of a community-based community college that used the existing human, physical, and programmatic resources of the community to meet learners' needs. So with the Commission's approval, we chose to simply go get some learners and begin. If there were no examples, we had to create one." So they started by simply putting together, I think I have in the next slide, here it is. This is the first flyer. I don't know if you can see this, but it was, you know, in those days you mimeographed things, you know, and put it out, and they hung it up in diners and put it out in libraries and distributed as well as they could. And it says, you know, I don't know if you can see this, but it says, "Want to go to college but not sure where? Could you get better pay with more training? Can you teach others your skill? Is more education too expensive?" So they promoted this in a very grassroots way. And it was 1970 that they decided to just offer some courses. So the first courses were offered in spring 1971 in central Vermont, and these were in high school classes in church basements. Typing, child development, consumer protection, art appreciation, career opportunity program, and understanding human behavior. And in a little town in the Northeast Kingdom, they offered classes, child development, community leadership, cosmetology, Canadian studies, and industrial arts and crafts. Total students enrolled 150. Total who completed their courses, 101. The first courses were free. and would be for some time, the teachers, generally community members who had expertise they wanted to share, all volunteered their time. In the first report by this project to the state legislature said, "We have found many people with the capacity for effective teaching who may not have ordinary teaching backgrounds." To create a system, they recruited professors from UVM, a couple of other experts to help evaluate their courses. The first students were all adults, all older than traditional college ages. The great majority were women, and their numbers grew fast, from roughly 100 during the first trimester to over 700 students during the fourth trimester. They reported in 1972. During the past year, demand for, it was called VRCC, the Vermont Regional Community College Commission, services by potential students exceeded the available courses by nearly 2 to 1. So the college gets launched. At this point, it's free. And all the students, this is the concept, they're not going to have college professors. They're going to recruit volunteers from the community who teach what they know. So a teacher might teach education, an accountant might teach accounting, a lawyer might teach pre-law, I might teach writing, you know, and it was an era of sort of, you know, the late 60s. There was a lot of interest in community service and changing the world and that sort of thing. So people actually did volunteer. One of them was a man named Dick Isley, who was taught one of the very first courses in Montpelier, remained teaching courses at CCV from early 70s to 2013. And here is Dick's initial memory, because I interviewed a lot of people and I recorded them. And a lot of this book is the story of CCV told in people's own words. So Dick says, "My first class was held in the basement of the Bethany Church in downtown Montpelier. He was teaching understanding human behavior to 12 adults, most of them women. He said all CCV classes at that time were held wherever free or cheap space could be found. At the time there was no formal registration, no tuition, no teacher pay, no grades, and no credits. This amazing experiment in community education was strictly a matter of matching adults in the community who wanted to learn something with other people from the same community who had the appropriate talents to teach them. How cool was that? From the first class on," he said, "I was hooked on teaching adults. The typical student in my early Montpelier classes was a married or recently divorced adult woman who had suspended her educational goals to raise a family and in some cases find part-time work. These women were smart and highly motivated. CCV was providing the opportunity for them to ease back into formal education at the college level and do it locally. I could tell this was an incredible, innovative experiment that had the potential to fill a large gap in Vermont's existing system of higher educational offerings. However, even the best situations often have a downside somewhere. More than a few of the women students in my early class expressed to me that their enthusiasm for learning and the changes they were experiencing were not appreciated at home. In effect, their participation in college courses served to disrupt their marriages, especially marriages that may have been somewhat fragile to begin with. I quickly came to realize that CCV, still in its infancy, was right near the forefront of adult higher education in the country." I heard this story about women whose marriages were disrupted. There came to be an expression called the CCV divorce, where women would gain a credential and might go on to work at a higher level, and more salary, and this wasn't always appreciated at home, and they would wind up getting divorced. So it was something that was, you know, as he called it, a downside. Maybe not entirely for the women who were involved, but at any rate. So what I thought I would do is just share a couple of, because I did all this oral history, you call it, where you interview people and then you transcribe their actual words. And because so many people were involved in these early years, and it was such an innovative experiment. CCV was not like any other college in the country. They had no models, so they just invented it from scratch. And they would keep on inventing, and if things didn't work, and they often didn't, they'd try something else, and they'd learn from their experiences. One of the people who was one of the first people in the field was a guy named Tom Yan, who started the Windham and Windsor County Regional site in 1971. So this is down in Brattleboro area and Bellows Falls area. And Tom says, we created these great courses and advertised them to the community in this open-ended way. I think we had mimeographed course lists that we put up around in restaurants and pinned up in store windows. But we had no constituency. We had no student body per se the first few times around. I can remember many a night waiting with a teacher who had put their heart and soul into designing a course for people to show up, and nobody would. Then I would say, well, how about if we do this again next week, same time, same place? We would just keep trying. We were staffed by lawyers, all kinds of cool people from the community that were part of that whole radical chic thing. One of our big clientele were Head Start workers who were mainly women. They had a lot of what I call tacit knowledge that they have but don't know that they have it. How do you unearth that? And one of the key innovations that CCV was one of the first to work with was the assessment of prior learning, where you could go and formally they had a course where you could create a portfolio that showed what you had learned. Let's say you have been a Head Start worker for 20 years. You've learned a lot about education and child development, but you may not have any kind of a degree. But that knowledge is real. Why should you have to start a college career by taking courses in something you already know, like Child Development 101, for example? At CCV, they offered what they said called assessment of prior learning, which they still do. And this was pioneering in the country. There were a couple of other institutions that were also innovative that were doing it. The idea that you could gain college credit for what you already knew, your skills and knowledge that you had developed in your career and your life. So this was one of the ways that this college became more affordable, because if you can test out of courses, then your college is going to be cheaper, right? So this was one of the key things that they did. Another man I interviewed was a guy named John Turner, who was the first guy in Brattleboro town to be. He says, Peter was traveling around the state looking to expand the program. He hired me and 4 other people to start it in Windsor County. This was the late summer of 1971. The first time we went into Brattleboro, we invited the editor of the newspaper and all the civic leaders. The 5 of us stood up front like a lineup and proceeded to tell these very sophisticated, very tough-minded people, we're going to start a college in your town. We're not going to pay teachers any salary. We're not going to build a campus. We're going to have a community facility, and students don't have to pay anything. All I remember was the manager of the local radio station saying as politely as he could, you people will not be around a year from now. And the editor saying it was a ripoff of the taxpayers' money. So here's a couple stories then, more stories that John told me. One of the first courses when we started to get a, quote, respectable crowd, some of the mainstream Brattleboro society, instead of the commune hippie crowd, was an American literature course. The guy who taught it was living in a commune in Putney. We decided to have the course out at his place. So I remember driving these 4 straight Presbyterian women up to the course. He said, why don't we meet outdoors? He didn't have any shoes on and he had purple nail polish on. So he begins outlining the course and these women were sitting on a wagon and he's talking. Out of the farmhouse bounced 4 people with a volleyball who proceed to play in front of the class, totally nude. It was the last time I saw any of those women ever again. In those days, it was mostly women, a lot of single women struggling to survive. There was one woman who told me she wanted a course on literature, any kind of literature. She just wanted to read something. So I went to the public library in Brattleboro and I said, can we use your room on Tuesday night? They said, sure. So we scheduled the time, and when the night came, the woman didn't show up. I went back to her and I said, I thought you wanted this. How come you didn't show up? She said, oh, I didn't believe you. I thought, I get it. Why should you believe me? Here I come asking what you want to learn. You're a single mom with a couple of kids. You haven't had a lot of breaks in your life, so why should you believe me? So I said to her, I get it. Okay, let me ask you the question again. What do you want to learn? She said, it's really a question of developing credibility with people, especially people that have traditionally not been listened to. I always saw it as basically very revolutionary. I figured if we can give these people an opportunity to take control of their own learning, to have a major voice in what they learn and how they learn it, it has to run over into other aspects of their lives. That's important in our increasingly regimented society. It's romantic, but the alternative doesn't impress me. After the first couple of years, the college enrollment is booming. And they're still free. They're still taught by volunteers. And there's still no credit. In other words, the idea is that you're going to learn for the sake of learning. And this is a beautiful thing. Well, it is in its way. But Peter Smith, the founding president, tells a story in the book. He says, I went up to the Northeast Kingdom to give a talk, and this is still the early 70s. He says, I'm up in the Northeast Kingdom, and I'm talking to some folks at a community action agency telling them all about how it was going to be cool. No credit, just what you need to know. This woman stood up and she said, you, with your college degree on the wall, are telling me I don't need one? Peter, get real. I got back in the car afterwards and she was right. And it just flipped in my mind anyway. If this is going to be real, it had to be real by the rules of the game, not living outside in some other planetary system. So the college administrative leadership, there were a few people. Now, Peter was originally the only employee. Now they've got a few of them, and they're well-trained and well-educated, smart people. They say, okay, we need to figure out how to award credits and become accredited, but we want to stay centered on the learner. The whole original idea was, like he said with this woman at the library, what do you want to learn? Let's build a course or a program around what you want to learn. What are your goals? Normally, if a traditional student, I went to a traditional small college, I went in and I adapted myself to the programs of the college. These are your potential majors, here are your required courses, et cetera, et cetera. So I may have brought my own ideas, but I adapted myself to the college's structure. The idea of CCV was that the college would adapt itself to what the learner needed to know. This was kind of revolutionary, and they had to figure out how to become legitimate in the eyes of the higher education world, so they are accredited, they can award degrees, associate degrees, and graduates can transfer to, say, UVM or Middlebury or somewhere that they want to go for a bachelor's degree and have their credits count. So that is a process that took quite a while. And the rest of this book is about how CCV navigated its evolution from this radical idea of a free college that would be available in any community where people wanted to learn through volunteers who would teach what they knew. The college today is the second largest student body in Vermont, and it is highly regarded in the higher education world as one of the most innovative schools in the country, has been for 50 years. They like to say that their number one priority is to form the program around the learner. They have full-time advisors, but no full-time faculty. They've never had a full-time teacher. The faculty are paid now, and they have been for years, and they're now unionized. There's been a whole evolution in faculty pay. It started, you were teaching for free, then you were teaching for a pittance, and then gradually as they built a budget and a capability, you're teaching for more, and now they're unionized, and I don't think most faculty would say, we don't do it for the money. And it's a good thing because we really still don't get paid all that much. But the college still is a school that is primarily adults, still mostly women, although not as much as probably about 70% women in the student body, and still has this, every one of the centers has full-time advisors, so that you have somebody you work with closely to put together a program, how are you going to approach getting a degree, your assessment of prior learning, are you going to do that, how do you do that, financial aid, how do you find it, how do you solve the problems, everything from fixing the brakes on your car to, how are you going to work out a schedule that you can do with your family and job life. So it still is a uniquely structured school where no full-time faculty, all part-time, full-time advisors. The courses are no longer in church basements and in upstairs in ramshackle kind of rooms in downtown and anywhere they could find. It's now, you go to a center, but you also, about half their courses are online. They were one of the first colleges in the world to do online courses, and when the pandemic hit, And college like Middlebury had to go from 0 to 60. They had no online courses, and all of a sudden, they had to do all their coursework online. And I have friends who were professors there, and it was a big lift. Whereas CCV, it was just like shifting into a higher gear. They already had about 40% of their courses online, so they were able to shift. So they do a lot of things today to make college more flexible as well as affordable for adults. And we could talk about that, but I wanted to just give the basic story of this unique experiment in higher education that all the establishment thought was a crazy hippie idea that would never go anywhere. And today, it's an institution in Vermont and the second largest student body in the state. So it's kind of a cool story. And it was a privilege to put it together and interview all these people and talk about how the college kind of struggled and fought to keep its basic founding mission of serving mostly adults in flexible, student-centered ways, and yet become a legitimate college in the eyes of the world that was accredited. It has been accredited ever since the mid-'70s, and the credits would be transferable, and how would they sort of adapt to the 21st century of digital technology, online learning opportunities, and all the new world that opened up. So that's the basic talk.
That's very interesting. I really knew nothing of Vermont colleges.
And well, you said you were a teacher, is that right?
In Connecticut.
Okay.
I grew up in central New York, so I had the more traditional view, and I went to a private four-year college, so.
Yeah, I went to Kenyon in Ohio, very much of a traditional four-year college, and I don't honestly know that I learned all that much there. I feel like I learned a lot more when I went to work in the newspaper world as a young writer than I did as an English major at Kenyon. I don't know what.
I was an English major at Colgate University.
At Colgate, okay, yeah.
I loved it. I loved the learning there.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess it helped. I mean, I was a teacher, so.
Do you have is there anything else that I could?
No, that was
kind of a scattered talk, but I found this story just fascinating because people just said, we're going to create this because people need it. And we're not going to follow any models because there aren't any to follow. So we're just going to figure out how to do it, you know? And they kept on sort of solving problems as they went and learning from experience as they went. And it was very much of a community experiment. They literally did classes anywhere they could get for free at first. And then they started renting them. And then when the Americans with Disabilities Act came in the 80s, they had to start making their rooms accessible, and they had to start being more legitimate, you know. Originally they would be in stuffy, airless rooms upstairs from a shop, or there's a photograph in here, now I don't know how to start. Oh, here we go. There's a photograph in here here are a couple of the first classrooms. There's a couple of photos we were able to find. The top one is a class in the stock room in the back of a hardware store. And the second one, I don't know where it was, but you can see that most of the students are female, young women in this case. And it was about 90% female in the beginning, and all adults. They had no idea of teaching traditional age college students. That was not their mission. And in fact, the state college system very much didn't want them to do that, because that would be competing with. Vermont has a state college system of residential schools.
It's intimidating if you come from a family that doesn't have higher education
Right.
to go to an established institution. It's
Right.
And now the colleges, I think, are doing better about providing mentors and helping bridge that big gap.
Yeah, there's that movement. I've been reading about that, about the changes going on in higher education. More colleges are accepting adult students because adults need. But when they do that, they have to sort of reimagine how they're going to provide the education. Advisors are one thing.
Yeah, one example, first generation college student, immigrant family, shows up at Syracuse University, didn't know they weren't going to get books handed out by the teacher like you do in high school.
Like in high school.
Of course, how would you know that?
Yeah.
Just 1,000 cultural things that if you're not in that culture, you don't know.
And this is, so many students at this college are first in the family to attend the college, so they don't have a role model, they may not have the support at home, and often, of course, they've got jobs and families to deal with, and there's a lot to figure out.
Well, then the whole thing about breaking the family dynamics, like, it's not surprising there's a divorce.
Right.
Right.
This is kind of revolutionary in a lot of people's lives. If you're 40 and you didn't succeed when you tried college when you were 18 because you partied too much, or you didn't know what you wanted to do, you didn't know why it was worth it, whatever reason, or you didn't have the support, or you couldn't afford it, and so you dropped out. As a lot of people around the country, there are millions of people around the country that started college and didn't finish, and these people, if they turn 40 and say, in order to rise in my career, or in order to have a career that pays a living wage, I need a degree. But I'm 40 now, how do I do that? And there are millions of people around the country that are in that situation.
Yeah.
So this is why this has become one of the reasons I thought this story was worth telling, is because this is a college that to some degree has figured out how to answer that question.
And I imagine it's going to continue because it will look at what do the people want and need and how do we give it to them.
Right.
They're not entrenched in this, what we're going to do forever.
Right.
Who knows?
I might read, if I can find it quickly, the current president is a woman named Joyce Judy, and she's very highly regarded, and she says to me, wait a minute. Here it is. Something we've held true. She says, we've diversified our course delivery models, which now include flexible, synchronous, and accelerated options. We're developing more short-term credentials that easily build towards certificates and degrees in high-demand fields such as manufacturing, childcare, and IT. We continue to work closely with businesses throughout the state to ensure that CCV programs are aligned with employer needs. This is today's community college. She says, but something we've held true to throughout is that we've tried to make sure students are at the core of our decision making. Sometimes we're more successful at that than others, but it's always in our mind. And I also interviewed the original guy who recruited me to do this man named Tim Donovan, who was CCV's president from 2001 to 2009, and after that he was chancellor of the Vermont State College System, which CCV is now a part of. He said, I think the future of higher education looks more like CCV than it does like traditional institutions. Number one, we've never assumed that going to school is the defining element in a student's life. You have to make college fit into their defining elements. Those might be geographic, they might be financial, they might be family, they might be work. Number two, education is not sequential. It isn't high school, then college, then career. Our federal education policy is the way it is because it was written by congressional staff who went to Middlebury, then went to work for their congressperson, or law school. So that's their view of how you need to support colleges and universities, and it's just not the reality for a majority of students. Going to college is not sequential, and it shouldn't be. This requires you to think about a whole bunch of things differently. You took this course 4 years ago, so that doesn't count anymore? That's ridiculous. We need to be much more forgiving about how and when and where someone learned what they've been learning. Assessed prior learning should be a huge part of this. Yes, you learned that someplace. Let's value it. It's constantly asking yourself what's important and what isn't, he summed up. That, I think, is why CCV has been and continues to be a directional beacon of some sort.
It just speaks to them that they wanted their story told, and they weren't going to tell you how to tell the story.
Yeah, that was my agreement with the college. Was, I'll do this, but you can. I'd love your help. The college, suggested people to talk to, highlights of the story. They had a jumbled up archive in their Montpelier headquarters where I, could sort through old newsletters and articles and things, but they never told me this is what you have to write, and they never told me to change anything that I had written. And this was really important because if a book is going to be legitimate, it has to be,
exactly.
You have to be able to write what you think is.
I mean, as a journalist.
You can't just take directions unless you just want it to be seen as a PR exercise that nobody will care about. Anyway, there you go.
This was so interesting.
Thank
you
you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the Orca for being here. We had an interesting conversation.
I'm going to go away with